Martin Sawyers has been Chief Executive of the Plumbers, Gasfitters and Drainlayers Board, the independent regulator for those trades in New Zealand, since September 2015. Martin's a lawyer and spent 18 years in private sector practice before moving to the public sector in 2009. He's held extensive governance roles in both the public and private sectors. In recent years, Martin's mainly worked in the area of regulation and is a strong advocate for a pragmatic and solutions-focused approach to that discipline. Martins has led the introduction of mandatory continuing professional development and a number of competency initiatives, the use of mobile phone apps, targeted enforcement, and a highly successful public awareness campaign that incorporates a diverse cultural audience. Martin, welcome. He's speaking today. His topic is modern regulation, tackling the problems of a rapidly changing world. Welcome.
Well, thanks very much. Just want to acknowledge the organisers of this, Shane, Emily, Marilyn. It's an excellent conference, and I'm certainly learnt a lot already from listening to other speakers. And hopefully I can share some of the New Zealand experience as well. I'd like to acknowledge a couple of people. Peter Jackson, the Chair of the Plumbers Board, is here with me today. Peter's just coming to the end of a second 9-year term with the Plumbers Board. He's currently on the executive of the World Plumbing Council, and prior to that, Peter also served a term as President of New Zealand Master Plumbers, so he's made a huge contribution to plumbing in New Zealand. Also, as the Deputy Chair of our board, Nick Fleckney's here. Also in the audience, we've got the Chief Executive of New Zealand Master Plumbers, Greg Wallace, and also from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, Ross Wakefield. Look, I just about didn't come to this conference. 6 weeks ago I was ready to pull out, and that's because of an event that occurred in Perth on a Saturday night. Stuart Henry was sitting in Perth at the Perth Stadium. He wasn't, I'm reliably informed he wasn't drinking out of the water fountains there. They're contaminated with lead, of course. He was sticking strictly to a beer diet, and he was watching the Wallabies absolutely thump the All Blacks. So Peter Jackson and I had a meeting on Monday, and I said, look, Peter, if we lose that second Bledisloe Cup game, we're definitely not going to Australia. Fortunately, a week later in Auckland, right prevailed, and the All Blacks, watched by 25 plumbers from Australia, I understand, thumped the Wallabies in return. Those plumbers should have stayed at home. Should have done. But look, it's fantastic to come here today. I am initially... my premise of what I'm going to talk about is that there are what I think are 3 key concerns for anyone that is working in the field of regulating the plumbing industry. Firstly, you want to ensure that you have properly trained plumbers and you have enough of them. That's a given. Secondly, you need to ensure that your workforce remains current. We talked yesterday, we heard someone talk about a lifetime apprenticeship. And that's absolutely vital in my view. We have to create an environment where once you're trained, you accept that you're going to go on learning for the rest of your career. And thirdly, the flip side of having enough skilled people is you need to discourage those who are unauthorised from doing plumbing work. They're not qualified, they're not trained. You need to stop that work from taking place. Now, against that background of those 3 key things, we've got a lot of changes occurring in the world. The regulatory landscape, if you like, is changing rapidly. Firstly, we've got a huge amount of new products coming on board. Secondly, there's a lot of new technology available. We saw some of that demonstrated over the last 2 days. We've got climate change, and I'd like to congratulate PICAC for the work they're doing in that area, and we saw their magnificent new facility earlier this week. We've got a worldwide construction boom. Associated with that throughout much of the world, we've got a shortage of skilled labour. And we've also got a shrinking world where we've got migration and people with skills wanting to transfer from one jurisdiction to another. So I'm going to outline what we're doing in New Zealand to meet those challenges. I've already heard how some of the rest of the world's meeting those challenges. And I look forward over the next day and a half to talking to you and listening to the presentations and hearing about some of the things you're doing. Because after all, this is all about learning off each other. So the worldwide skills shortage, I think, is a key issue, and it's certainly one that's affecting New Zealand. Just to put it in context, India was forecast, according to government statistics from India, as needing 1 million new plumbers between 2008 and 2022. Now, coming from a country where we only have 3,000 apprentices in New Zealand, and that's probably a record for us, it's mind-boggling to think you're going to need 1 million new tradespeople over that period of time. India's not alone though. The United States, again government figures from there, it was forecast there that the need for plumbers, pipe fitters and steam fitters was going to have to increase by 16% between 2016 and 2024. In the UK, there's been a warning there that skills shortages, including plumbers, and this was all pre the Brexit fallout, will hamper housing delivery. In New Zealand, we're not immune from this. The demand for plumbers was forecast by our Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment to grow by 15% by 2022, and that's especially the case in Auckland. In a population of 4.5 million people, over half our population live in Auckland. The forecast demand there is a required increase of 32%. So, how are we trying to address the issue in New Zealand, and I suspect it's the case around the world? Firstly, we need to re-engage young people to get back into the trades. Last year in New Zealand, 65,000 people left school. Of that 65,000 people, only 4,500 went into any form of apprenticeship at all. And of that 4,500, only 2,500 went into a traditional trade, electrical, plumbing, building. That's a very, very small portion of school leavers going into the trades. Our average age of our apprentice in New Zealand is now 23 years old. And there's nothing wrong with having older apprentices. But we also want to re-engage young people back into the trades as well, so we're getting our fair share of them. We are investigating alongside Master Plumbers, and I didn't see him in the audience before, but the chairman of Master Plumbers is here also, Craig Foley. Alongside them and our industry training organisation, we have been investigating the creation of an accelerated apprenticeship. Currently in New Zealand, you train for 4 years, you sit a registration exam, 2 years later, you sit a second exam and become a certifier. We want to bring down that initial 4 to 5 year apprenticeship down to 3 if we can, without compromising the standards. How do we do that? We are drawing on something that we've seen in New South Wales, where you have a concentrated period of 18 months with intensive theory and intensive workshop practice and intensive engagement in the workplace. After that 18 months, you do a further 18 months in the workplace before you sit your registration exam. So in New Zealand, where most people are trained in all 3 trades, that brings your apprenticeship down from 4.5 years to 3 years. On top of that, a further 2 year period, and you'd be fully qualified. The other thing that we're doing there is we're working in the field of education and training to make it easier for people to sit and pass their registration exam. Again, when I say making it easier, not making the exam easier, but actually making the process easier. We used to have a process where you could only sit that registration exam twice a year. You used to wait 6 to 8 weeks to get your results. We've moved to a form of electronic examination. They use the same system in New Zealand for testing airline pilots. So we think it's probably a pretty robust system. You can sit that exam now in New Zealand 52 weeks of the year. You show up in an exam centre out of a database of questions. Your test exam is produced for you. Someone sitting alongside you could be sitting an exam that's completely different to yours because it's generated out of a database. You have your exam result within 24 hours. In some cases, you have the exam result within 1 hour of completing the exam. So you know whether you've passed or failed. You also get told what areas you've done well in, what areas you haven't. If you haven't done well in an area, it's telling where to swat up before you actually have another go at it. We're also in the process of developing a level 5 qualification. So that'll take you, once you've done your initial apprenticeship and done your registration exam, you will then do some further training, mainly distance learning night classes, probably electronically. That'll be delivered over an 18-month period and will take you from that tradesman level up to the certifying level. I think some of the speakers have identified, and I think it's the case in New Zealand looking to the future, the conversation then needs to turn to, there probably needs to be some higher level qualification, degree level qualification created for the industry, because that's the demand from young people. They want to achieve that higher level of education. We touched on this yesterday at the at the annual general meeting of the World Plumbing Council. What we found in New Zealand is that, and it's probably, we suspect the same throughout the world, a portion of our industry very good with their hands, but not so good on the written side of things. We asked ourselves why, we did some research. Those people we found probably had a diagnosed learning difficulty, dyslexia or something like that. They were probably never going to pass a written exam. The feedback from the industry, though, was that those people were actually very, very good at doing the actual work, the hands-on work, and they actually know their stuff. So we have a process in place now. If you are having difficulties like that, you go and see a professional assessor who will give a diagnosis for what your learning difficulty is. We will then provide a form of assistance for you to pass the exam. Firstly, that person can register into a new class of licence that holds them over until they sit the exam. In the past, those people, even though they might have done 4 years of training, they simply dropped out as labourers at the end of it because they couldn't pass the exam. We created a class of licence, a journeyman class of licence, which gave them some status in the industry. Then, having had the assessment done, we are allowing some of them to have reader-writers working alongside them in the exam. We're allowing some of them to have extra time to sit the exam. Again, this is all on professional recommendation. Or thirdly, in a severe case, we're allowing those people to sit the exam orally rather than in a written form. That's conducted by someone who is a certifier in their trade, who we have in turn trained up to be able to have those sort of professional conversations. So the person still needs to know their stuff, but they just demonstrate it in a different way. The other thing that needs to happen in terms of addressing the shortage, and ironically, I know that there's a breakout session about women in the trades happening right now, is we need to encourage more women to enter the trades. Australia, I read's got maybe around 1,000 women working in the plumbing trades. In New Zealand, we're under 50. 2% of the current apprentices being trained in New Zealand are females. And when 50% of your consumers, our customers, are female, it just doesn't make sense that our figures are down that low. The government in New Zealand is trying to lead the way, and now out of our board that I report to, a board of 10, 4 of those people now are female. The other area where we need to diversify is ethnically. I suspect an Australian plumbing audience probably isn't too different to a New Zealand plumbing audience, a lot of white faces. In Auckland in particular, 23% of our population there now is Asian. It's forecast to reach 35% by 2038, yet less than 3% of our apprentices are currently of Asian descent. So we need to diversify. The other thing that we need to do, I think, in a shrinking world where we've got people moving from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, is we have to have a way to sensibly work out what their qualifications are and whether they should be able to work in our jurisdiction. What we've done in New Zealand is we have an independent contractor who has a system of assessing someone's overseas qualification. If their qualification is assessed as matching New Zealand's, They can sit our exam. If they pass it, they can practice in New Zealand. If there's a little bit of doubt, and so maybe some of their knowledge is practical rather than paper-based, they can elect to have a professional conversation. Again, that's a professional conversation with someone who is a tradesperson at a certifying level, who actually can find out by discussing with them, do they have the necessary level of knowledge, the same as what their New Zealand equivalent would. The last thing that they will do as part of that process, they'll actually identify any gaps in their knowledge. If they have a gap in their knowledge, we will then direct them to the appropriate training that they can undertake to close that knowledge gap, that will then again allow them to become registered in New Zealand. So we're recognising we need some overseas skills, but we don't want to drop our standards in doing so. Once you have people competent, of course, the second thing is you need to keep them competent. And this is where we think your annual continual professional development is absolutely important. We've had continuing professional development in New Zealand since 2012. Initially, we had a points-based system. I understand that Australia's may be investigating having a similar system. The warning I'd say is there are some pitfalls with it. What we found with that system is it did become captured by the manufacturers and suppliers. And we also found that it was very, very hard to police the quality of that training. So you had some really, really good courses produced by some people that were excellent. But you also had some courses that were very, very good in teaching you how to drink Heineken and eat sausages. Now, that was great if you're like me and you like doing those things, but it wasn't necessarily adding any knowledge. We've actually gone to a mandatory system in New Zealand where we actually pick the topics. The board does. We pick those topics based on what we're seeing in our complaints, the intelligence that we're gathering from the industry, and also the information that we're gathering from building regulators. People then have to show up and do those topics. They can do them two ways. They can attend face-to-face training, and there's 43 events that are held throughout New Zealand every year that they can attend. 75% of the industry attend those events, and they're highly successful because, as well as offering the training, the industry enjoys the chance to actually mingle with each other and also see some of the products and new innovations that have been developed. The other 25% choose to do it online, which is an option that's available. The other thing we're doing in terms of maintaining competency, we're updating our database at the moment. We're creating a mobile phone app that'll be in place by early next year. That'll allow practitioners to do all their interactions with the board via a mobile phone, register, re-licence, register to do their continuing professional development. But also alongside it, we're working with Standards New Zealand, and all the relevant standards are going to be available via the mobile phone app, and they're going to be available in a format that's mobile friendly, so it's easily searchable on a mobile phone. The last thing we're doing in terms of maintaining competency is we've got a help desk manned by people that are actually tradespeople. They will actually help people keep out of trouble rather than try and pick up the pieces. And alongside that, we've got a chat bot operating on our website. That chat bot is trainable, so over time it becomes better and better at actually answering questions for people. And we're finding some practitioners are actually enjoying engaging with it. We've had a couple of questions about their sexuality and that type of stuff, but most of the questions we're getting are actually quite sensible. Lastly, you need to target unauthorised work. One of the key weapons we use, and I encourage you to go around later and actually look at this on the Apple site or the Google site, we have a mobile phone app called Report a Cowboy. This mobile phone app allows you to quickly advise the board of someone you detect doing unauthorised work. It's been successful. The Builders Board in New Zealand's now adopted it, as have the electricians. We find, as well as generating complaints, more importantly, it gives us intelligence on what's happening around the country. So when I send an investigator out, I can actually send them out to where I'm getting information about where the problems are. So that allows targeted operations. But the most important thing in terms of tackling unauthorised work is to focus on getting the public on side. So we've been running a campaign now for 4 years, sort the pros from the cons. We have, on average every year, we have a total audience across all the various advertising platforms of 15 million. So in a country of 4.5 million people are watching the advertisements again and again and again. What it's done is it's increased the people going to our website to search the public register to see if someone's registered and licensed by 90%. And some independent polling that we've done over the last 2 years has indicated that 9 out of 10 New Zealanders now know that you must be registered and licensed to do plumbing work, and that's where we get the public on side. So, just a quick sample of the advertising.
Drainlaying isn't child's play.
Neither is plumbing.
Or gas fitting. If it were easy, there'd never be problems.
If there were never problems, we wouldn't need regulations. But there are problems and regulations to navigate.
The fact is, using an unlicensed tradie puts your family's health and safety and home insurance at risk. So we're here.
To inform and protect you from making mistakes.
Or hiring cowboys.
Go to our website for more information and advice.
Smart technology with that, again using Google searching. If people search up DIY jobs, etc., plumbing on the internet, the advertisement follows them around. So you'll see that advertisement every time you log on for the next day or so.
Welcome
And
to
the
What's
second
That
example.
Smell, the cooking show for homeowners. Today we're going to be boiling an egg. First off, you need some water. Oh, does that sometimes. My dad had to go at the plumbing last month. Never mind. Right, next we've got to bring the egg to the boil. I got a cheap gas hookup last summer. It's a bit uncontrollable, so I need to be careful because my insurance may be invalid now. Don't be a fool. Always use a licensed plumber, gas fitter, or drain layer on any restricted work. Sort the pros from the cons.
So that's the sort of thing. We run it every year. We increase our audience share every year. We've also experimented with making it available in different languages. So, for instance, a couple of years ago we had that extensively advertised on WeChat, trying to target the Chinese audience. So, in summary, look, we are facing new challenges. I think the key focus of the regulator and of the industry really remains the same. It's focusing on those three things. I think we've all got to have the courage to find innovative solutions, and then through conferences like this, it's essential that we are able to share those solutions and learn from each other. Thanks very much for your time. Thank you.